Good morning, everyone. Today we have the pleasure of having Dr. Jiju P. Alex with us. Sir is Director of Extension, Directorate of Extension, Kerala Agriculture University, KU main campus. And the topic chosen for deliberation by our esteemed guest is Rural Institution for Broad Basing Extension Services, Concepts and Strategies. Sir, you are audible as well as visible. Can you start with the PPT and so that we could start? Hello, sir. Dr. Alex, we can start.
Okay. Can you hear it? Hello.
We can
Hello.
hear you fine.
Yes, sir.
Just need don't do this. Go to PPT, start the slideshow. Go to PPT and start the slideshow.
Can you see it?
Yes, we can see you.
Okay.
Every other participant is requested to put their microphone in on mute, please.
I'll ask people to let it. Okay.
Please start.
Good morning, one and all. In fact, I am so happy that I have been invited to deliver this lecture on this topic, rural institutions for broadening extension services, the concepts and strategies, which I think is part of this orientation program. You know that this is a very important concept which the current world is going to discuss in the context of changes that happen in the entire development scenario, particularly in agriculture. So rural institutions are very important as far as extension is concerned, because we reach out to the people through these institutions. So when you talk about institutions, particularly students of extension are not new to that concept. We have learned about institutions in rural areas as well as maybe I would say urban settings. We have largely known about institutions which are working in different sectors of human activity, but rural institutions have always had an important role in the process of extension, because that is the best conduit through which we can reach out to the people. So how do you make use of these rural institutions effectively? How do you improvise and improve the functioning of rural institutions so as to address various developmental issues in the country? I think that requires a relook, and as an extension professional, we should be having adequate understanding of the structure and functioning and dynamics of rural institutions. How do they evolve? How can they be improved? How can they be evolved into much more effective organizations so that there can be more linkages with the people? So, in fact, we would not be able to keep away the fact that in spite of the tremendous development that we have made in terms of our economic growth, the rural poor in India is having a very difficult plight. They do suffer from various constraints. And the plight of the rural poor is so deplorable that any particular intervention has not been able to increase equitable distribution of resources among people. And in spite of the innumerable programs that have been declared by various governments from time to time, at the national level as well as at the state level, we have not been able to bring in equitable development in terms of the accepted parameters of development that we usually take into consideration. So there could be some patches of development here and there, but when you generally take the entire situation in the country, we can see the rural poor has been suffering from one constraint or the other constraint, and their situation has been deteriorating, particularly in terms of the resources available, opportunities available, and ever so many things. And this has to be viewed in the context of various socio-economic changes that have been unleashed by, I would say, globalization of our economy. Even though globalization has been able to bring in changes in technology, even though globalization has been able to bring in new actors into the economy, the plight of the rural poor had been the same or worse, I would say, because people have not been capacitated enough to take on the challenges put forward by globalization. So that is another important issue, the context in which this topic would be placed. I think I would come to some of those issues related to globalization and its discontent, particularly in developing countries, later. So you know that majority of the world's rural poor, as we know, not only in India, across the world, are family farmers, fishers, livestock and forest users who live in isolated areas. So I would not say isolated because some of them are remote areas, connectivity is very less, exposure to the outside world, even in spite of the fact that there has been tremendous improvement in ICT and other communication methods, this has not been adequately developed. This has not adequately developed. And most of the rural communities, for that matter, particularly the marginal people, I'm not talking about the urban dwellers who would be having access to some of the amenities, for that matter. Particularly the rural poor, in spite of all the other endowments that they might have, they have this issue of isolated dwellings. They are living in remote places, they don't have access to various resources, and their livelihoods are always at stake due to various reasons. So on the one side, there is a huge surge of economic growth which would benefit only a few people, and that happens at the cost of the rural poor who do not have access to resources. So this is a very, very pathetic and very, I would say, difficult situation which exists in almost all developing economies. The first and foremost thing is that most of them are marginalized and geographically dispersed. They are not united. There are no concerted efforts to coordinate various activities by them. They are too huge and they are more in numbers, and it becomes literally impossible for us to coordinate the activities of the rural poor. So the second one is rural poor face major constraints in seizing the social and economic opportunities to improve their lives and those of their families. This is a very important thing. So one particular thing that characterizes the rural poor is that they are not able to seize or they capture the social and economic opportunities that are available to the rest of the people in the country. So they do not have access to resources, first of all. They do not have access to communication. They do not have access to, say, better education. They do not have access to any of such indicators which would make a population grow faster. And this lack of social and economic opportunities, particularly in India, we can see the opportunities are basically a function of the social stratification, not only in terms of economic indicators, but also in terms of social indicators. You have huge discrimination that happens. You have huge caste system, I mean, a very, very weird caste system which exists even now, in spite of the fact that we have been able to bring more people under education. So this denial of social and economic opportunities is a very important factor which can be projected as a constraint of the rural poor. And particularly when it becomes, I mean, in the case of women, youth and indigenous people as tribals, they often bear the brunt of the socio-economic disparities. Even among the rural poor, further discrimination can be seen. For women, we know that the gender concerns have been mainstreamed into agriculture only recently. And in several places, in spite of the fact that there are certain concerns raised by non-governmental agencies, governments themselves, this discrimination still exists. Within the four walls of the house and also in the society, wherever they go, we can see that the women are discriminated. And youth, for that matter, in spite of the huge skilling programs which are happening, we know that youth are still incapable of finding job, and non-employment or unemployment is a huge problem. And when it comes to indigenous people, particularly the downtrodden, the tribals, the subaltern sections of the society, have not been able to come to the mainstream of the population, and they are still lagging behind in terms of various uh, parameters of development. So the issue is basically not a question of just education or providing them with opportunities. It is a much faster and difficult question. It's a question of lack of equal access to land. You know that land reforms have not been implemented by most of the states in India. Access to land is very less. Access to resources are also limited due to heavy urbanization, industrialization, and the perils of globalization, which I have been referring to earlier. Lack of education facilities, information opportunities to participate in development process, which is a very important thing. So maybe you will hold a meeting of a few stakeholders and beneficiaries, and you would say that participation has taken place, or you would say that people have been a part of the decision-making process. But truly speaking, people do not have any stake in the process of decision-making, which is a political process. So people do not have access to any of these opportunities. And participation in the development process is a very uphill task, I would say, because making people participate in the true process of decision making is not something which can be easily done. So when you take the entire country, you can see that there is huge denial of this opportunity of being a part of decision making process in the government. Basically, that leads to decision making in development, which is going to influence the stakeholder. So the stakeholder who is going to be impacted by a development process do not have any stake in the decision-making process, which is true in the case of the rural poor. So now we know that rural institutions, straight away coming to the subject, rural institutions are institutions which operate in the rural areas. They are social formations. They are gatherings, formalized or formalized structures of people coming together with a particular objective and function. So you have been able to find out several rural institutions. See, we had the archaic rural governance institutions like the Panchayati Raj, which had been here quite from early times. You have small gatherings or small groups of people coming together. And after independence, we have seen a surge of cooperatives, farmer groups, etc., etc. So any number of such groups have emerged from time to time. So particularly after decentralization, democratic decentralization, there has been again any number of such rural democratic institutions working in the rural areas. Now we started hearing about, say, the farmer producer organization, farmer interest groups, and things of that kind. So artisans groups, artisans guilds, so artisans sectoral congregations, so many things have existed in India from time to time. This is not only in India, in other parts of the world also, you could see groups of farmers, artisans, rural poor coming together for a particular purpose, and they evolve into rural institutions. So basically, these rural institutions, their structure and their activities are very important when it comes to development. So how do you make use of these rural institutions? What are the different issues that they face, and how can they be strengthened? How can they be subjected to innovation process from time to time to take on the challenges that emerge is an important concern of an extension professional. And that exactly is the reason why this topic has been included in this orientation program. So let me ask you something. I think one or two representatives can answer my questions. Now, how many of the participants of this training program are from the discipline of extension exclusively. Can you hear me?
Sir, yes,
Hello?
sir.
Please.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, sir, this is Prakash Rathod, sir.
Please.
Sir, this we have actually seen the registration list of the participants of it, sir.
Yes.
We have
Hello.
almost around 180 to 90 of them are actually from external background, sir.
Extension background. They are all PhD
KVK.
holders. They are teachers of various universities, isn't it?
Yes, sir. They actually include PG and PhD students. We have some KVK staff. We have some university staff. Although some are not from extension, but still they are working in KVK.
They're working
So in
in the
fact,
field
they
of
feel.
extension. Okay.
Yes,
okay.
yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. So basically, you can see that. Because I asked this specific question in view of the fact that if you want to get to know the rural structure of India, you can see, as I told you, the existence of several rural institutions that we have learned in the course on rural sociology. I think we have not gone far or deeper into the concept of rural sociology. It was only a very small course in the first year for the agriculture graduates. I do not know how many of you have got any particular intense reading in sociology. In sociological perspective, these institutions are very important. They are not only institutions which have been formed for economic reasons, there are all social reasons also. Say family itself is considered to be a rural institution, or an institution for that matter. It's not rural for that, it's a universal thing. It's an institution where two people come together to make a family for a particular objective, for coexistence and also procreation, and also inheritance of their belongings, their wealth. So there are a few functions attributed to family as an institution. Likewise, you can see several such institutions in India. Due to the complexity of social relations that we have in this country, there has been several such institutions. So we are basically talking only about a few institutions which are of importance to agricultural development or rural development and extension. So it is high time that we look into the details of these institutions maybe more intensely, so that maybe we will get cues as to how to improve it. So in fact, one particular characteristic of the rural institutions in India is that they are dispersed and fragmented in small economic units. And as a result of this, the small producers, we are talking about the rural poor, the small producers. We are not talking about the rural rich or maybe the middle class or the urban dwellers for that matter. We are talking about the small and marginal farmers who constitute majority of the agricultural manpower in the country. So you know the proportions, see almost about 60 to 70% of the total number of farmers belong to this category, but they have possession of only less than 20% of the total land area. So it makes the plight or the life of such people much more miserable because of lack of resources, which I had told you earlier. So the important problem is that they are dispersed and they are fragmented. So how do you unite these dispersed and fragmented people? How do you bring them together? On what basis would you be able to bring them together so that their capabilities can be increased, their purchasing power can be increased, their political bargaining capacity can be increased? Is a huge question as far as the small and marginal farmers or segments of this country is concerned. And also, the economy of scale is a very important thing. That is why most of the time these small producers would not be able to produce so much. Even though they toil a lot, they would not be able to produce so much because the scale of production, the economy of scale does not permit them to have profits out of their toil. So that is another important issue which we will have to address when you talk about bringing these small and marginal farmers or the rural poor together. And the third important issue is that they don't have inadequate support systems. This is basically a problem of investment in the public sector, basically. So you know that after globalization, there has been huge increase in investment from the private sector, and they have always tried to look for various sectors which can bring quick profit to their investment. So the capital for that matter would always be looking for new areas of investment wherein more profit can be generated. So in most of the cases, the rural sector, particularly sectors related to development of the rural poor, do not attract investors. That is because of the fact that the returns would be less. So when returns are less, they are not likely to invest hugely. So when the public sector recedes, when the governments decide not to spend too much on such sectors which are not profitable, which are not very lucrative, naturally what happens is the people who are at the receiving end would be subjected to more tribulation and trial because of the fact that they will not be supported by the public sector, by the government. So you can see that even though the investment in the rural sector has increased over a period of time, it has not been concomitantly adequate. It has not been able to address the basic issues of the people. Even after 70 years or so, after getting independence, if India has not been able to make much inroads into, say, the prospectives, the prospective pathways of development, it is mostly because of the skewed investment in the public sector, particularly with regard to rural health, rural education, rural infrastructure, etc., etc. If that had happened, the entire thing would have been different. There are a few states which have shown some other examples. Say, for example, Kerala, from I come from. I think many of my colleagues would also be part of this training program, participating from Kerala. The example of Kerala is a classic example of public investment in the social sector. So much of investment in the public health sector, in the public education sector, and also land reforms, they have together contributed to a much more egalitarian society, which more equitable distribution of resources among people. So it has got its own problems as well, but the social development indicators have been so, I would say, brightening, or they are I would say they are distinct from other states because of this deliberate efforts of the governments of Kerala. I would say governments of Kerala, from time to time, they have been able to invest in the social sector. That is an example. If that level of investment in the social sector had happened in other parts of the country, it would have been a different thing. These inadequate support systems, say in terms of communication, in terms of connectivity, in terms of roads, in terms of vehicular transport, in terms of, say, credit, in terms of employment generation, in terms of land reforms, in terms of health, education, etc., etc., have been very less. They were not up to the mark. They were not as big as expected in a big country like India. So inadequate support system is one issue which will have to be duly addressed. And a broad variety of institutional innovations have emerged in response to these issues. That also is very important. If you see cases from across the country, I think this is going to be a huge treasure house for research by extension scientists across the country, because I do not know how many of us have gone deep into these basic issues of rural development and rural institutions, and how we have approached them, I do not know. But I think, and I find that there is huge prospects for the researchers in extension to explore the issues related to this, because all these issues have been partly addressed. I would not say fully, but they have been partly addressed from time to time, and several institutional innovations have emerged as a result of the concerns expressed by various agencies from time to time to address these issues which I have listed just now. So looking at these institutional changes, looking at these new institutions which have emerged, I think we should be able to go forward by strengthening the various rural institutions. So when you talk about institutions or strengthening of institution, we have to consider the concept of institutional innovations, which is very important. Particularly, it has become a fad among the extension scientists to talk about innovations right now. And we always talk about innovations. And innovations have come in several hues and several nuances of innovations. The process of innovation are being discussed by people. So you can see that innovation basically, traditionally it was found as a new thing, a new technology, or a new material which is discovered or found out. Whereas in the new parlance, particularly in modern times, innovations are usually the change of policies, a new change in policies, a distinct change in policy which would bring about some unprecedented changes. A policy which we have been following all through several years gets changed, and a new policy comes in the place of an old policy, and as a result of that there would be changes, and then sometimes positive, sometimes negative. So particularly if it is positive changes that are brought by this policy, then we would say it is an innovative policy. These changes in policy is considered to be an innovation. Changes in standards are considered to be innovation. Changes in regulations, for that matter, is again, say, we have discussions about ease of doing business. So all the old archaic forms of licensing and other issues which had existed in the country earlier were considered to be constraints to improvement and growth in the industrial sector, or maybe in the business sector. So there has been some liberalization of these regulations, and it has brought out huge changes. So changes in regulations, if you make some process easier compared to existing ones, that is an innovation. Then maybe processes, say, how do you organize people? If you come up with a new method of organizing people, that could be an innovation. If you come out with a new method of marketing, that could be an innovation. So agreements, models, ways of organizing, institutional practices, or relationships with other organizations, all these things are examples of innovations. Say, institutional practice, how can that be an innovation? That is basically, instead of an archaic, a lethargic, and a bureaucratic way of dealing things, if you replace all those processes with a new vibrant process, then it would certainly bring about changes. That is an innovation. So likewise, if you have new relationship with other organizations, you have not been able to find out, you find out a way out. Say, for example, marketing, you try to find out a new partner for marketing, and he does that job, or that organization does that job, and you can concentrate on your activities. You need not spend much time and energy on something which you do not know. So that is a new partnership. That new partnership would bring about huge changes. So this kind of relationship with other organizations is also an innovation. So in fact, all these changes should create a more dynamic environment that encourages improvements in the performance of an institution or system to make it more interactive and competitive is the most important thing. So when these changes bring about positive changes in an institution to make it more interactive and competitive, then you would say that there has been an institutional innovation. So these two important things have to be underlined. First one is the performance of the institution system becomes more interactive and competitive. First of all, you have to be more interactive. Interactive in the sense you should be able to open up. You should be able to open up your windows so that you can stretch your hands and grab any opportunity. You can hold, you can join your hands with any other organization who is ready to join hands with you. You should be able to bring in a win-win situation where both the organization would benefit. So you should know the contours of that relationship. You should know how to forge such relationships. And then you should know how to operationalize such a relationship in a very practical manner. That is very important. And in this process, your organization becomes competitive. So this is true in the case of any organization. Your education institution, there can be institutional innovation. Your research organization, there can be more number of linkages and partnerships. So that can be an innovative idea. Maybe if it is a marketing organization, there can be innovation. And this same principle and the same law can be applied to rural institutions as well. So increasing the capability of rural institutions to make them more competitive is nothing but bringing institutional innovations to the rural institution. So how do you bring that is a very important thing. Unless these institutions become equipped with the skills and the knowledge and also the wherewithal to take on the challenges posed by modern age, these institutions would not be able to thrive, because outside there are several huge ferocious competitors trying to swallow in all smaller forms of institutions. So I remember, I think during our degree days, Alvin Toffler had come out with a book which had predicted the plight of humankind. So he said there would be only a few conglomerates, multinational conglomerates, who would be ruling the entire world. He said in a prophetic manner almost about 20 to 30 years back. That book was called Future Shock. I still remember that we never, even reading, after reading that book, we had never anticipated that such a thing would evolve. So now, 30 years from that point of time, now if you examine the situations that exist, not only in India, in other parts of the country, in the world as well, you can see the number of billionaires have increased. Particularly after COVID, I would say there has been a huge surge in the assets of billionaires in the country. And the gap between the poor and the rich has widened enormously. So you may not be able to bridge that at all. So in a very illustrious book, in a very, very, very important book, Thomas Piketty, who wrote about the nature of capital, that book itself is called Capital. He talked about income disparities which had existed across centuries in the European countries. He said, in spite of the fact that there had been interventions, in spite of the fact that the government has been collecting taxes even from the rich, it has not been distributed to the poor. It has not been distributed among the common people. So, as I said, the investment which was required to be done by governments from time to time for the benefit of the poor has been receding. So this has become a huge gap nowadays. And I do not know by what means you would be able to bridge this gap. That gap is still increasing. That means competition on the one side is mounting, and the state support for those people who are likely to be affected by this competition is not increasing correspondingly. So the people who are destined to be between these two poles would be suffering too much. Then how do you bridge this gap? How do you lend a supporting hand to these people? How do you take them out of this deep peril in which they have fallen? It's an important issue. It is not only a question of development alone, it's a question of salvaging an entire population. So it is very important that we have to have new systems of institution by giving people more power, by giving people more opportunity and authority to decide on their own things. So now I think since we don't have much time and I have been asked to finish the talk within 1.5 hours or so, we'll again come back. Maybe if there are discussions, I will diverge on that in a detailed manner. Now you have to again closely examine what are the features and components of institutional innovations. See, the changes that we have seen earlier, we have defined institutional innovation. The changes which are envisaged as part of these innovations, or these changes, these positive changes that may happen to any organization or institution, will be implemented by various organizations. Maybe a research organization can be an initiator or starter or a catalyst of this change. Maybe associations or institutions per se themselves can also initiate this change. Institutions, public or private, or maybe academic or non-governmental, anybody can come out with changes. They can experiment with changes. They can find out the efficacy of those changes, and they can make it into a model which can be scaled up and emulated by rest of the people. See, these examples can be seen. The biggest example is the classic example of the Grameen Bank. You know how Grameen Bank has evolved. Grameen Bank was something which has not existed earlier. So when Muhammad Yunus, I do not know how many of you have read the autobiography of Muhammad Yunus, a bankers. I have forgotten that particular title. It is available with Penguin. So you can see that was a small assignment given to the students of economics in Dhaka University. They were asked to go around and find out what is happening with the weaving community who were residing in the downhills of the Dhaka hill where the university is situated. People went around and came out with the fact that these people do not have any means of livelihood. So he again made an exploration regarding the livelihood pattern of the weavers. They said they don't have money to buy the raw materials for weaving baskets. So they could not sell away their products. They did not get adequate prices, and they did not have money to buy raw materials. And if they could be given a small loan to buy raw materials, say the reeds used for weaving baskets, then they would be good. They would be good in the sense they would be able to pay it back. So Yunus from his pocket basically paid this money to a few basket weavers, and they were eager to pay it back. In fact, he did not anticipate that the poor would be so keen to pay it back. So it was basically a new thing which was found out by him. In fact, before that, he had approached almost all the national and other banks in Bangladesh to find out whether these poor people would be able to get some credit. So they said without any collateral security, without any endowment to mortgage, the credit would not be given. So these people don't have even a hut or maybe even a cent of land to their possession to pledge or to mortgage to a bank to get a credit. So all the banks turned his request away. So it was at that crucial juncture he decided to spend money from his pocket. And later on, the rest of the thing is history, that there emerged a new banking system for the Grameen Bank, the self-help group, and all such institutions emerge. So there are several examples. Likewise, maybe regional variations of such examples have evolved. And this is one example where you can come up with a model of a rural institution which can be emulated across the country or the world. So it can be initiated by any organization. And they could also be initiated by national or innovation systems. And these innovations may relate to not only the organizations, which I have told you, it can be about products, processes, marketing, or organization, or may seek different types of objectives. So you look around and you can find improvements possible in any transaction which is human, and such improvements can be made into innovation. So this concept of innovation management, or this concept of innovation process, so innovation process in extension also has another wider concept. Say, for example, an organization is originating from its own idea, and it is growing slowly, and it is diversifying its activities, it is identifying the constraints, it is trying to resolve the constraints, and in that process, they come across new opportunities, and they adopt technologies and other innovations which can suit the new opportunities. They grab a new market. So likewise, they diversify their product and then go on with the various futuristic activities. That also is an innovation process, a continuous innovation process. There are so many terminologies related to that. That session has been included in this orientation course or not. This is very important for the extension student, because we should closely understand what an innovation process is and how does it happen, and how does it how can it be measured, and so forth and so on. So in fact, my concern is that how do you make this innovation process possible in rural institutions, which is very important. So again, coming to the concept of institutional innovation, you can see that this definition of institutional innovation, maybe we have aptly discussed the origin of the terminology. It is generally defined as a technical change in institution or part of institutional change. Whatever new things happen positively can be considered as an innovation. So it can be executed by various agencies. So most of the time, this is a terminology which is mostly identified with the industrial sector and the corporate sector. The corporates always innovate. Corporates always innovate in every aspect. So you can see a brand new car coming up, and its features will be changing every now and then. So you'll be having different variants. Your softwares always undergo change. Your games always, your mobile phones always undergo change. One or the other improvement can be seen. One or the other feature gets added on to the existing features. So this is basically called as an innovation process. They always try to innovate to cater to the requirements of the clientele or the end user. So why don't you have this kind of an idea applied to rural institutions as well? So in fact, the process of rural or institutional innovation should start from the organization, and it should have an institutional environment. You have to come up with a network. You should have institutional arrangements, and also you should have institutional changes, and which would lead to institutional innovation. So an institution has to be closely understood, studied. You have to find out what exactly is the environment that exists in that institution. How do you build a network of such institutions if they cannot exist on an independent basis, or if they want to again elaborate or again diversify their activities? How can you bring in a networking system? What are the different arrangements which are possible in the network, and what are the changes which are possible, and how can those changes be brought in? All those things are involved in the process of institutional innovation. This is a complicated process. I don't think this is the apt time for us to discuss this. So what would be the impact of this institutional innovation? That is another important thing which we will have to ponder. It would certainly, or it should certainly, increase productivity. It should increase economic growth. It should also strengthen the resilience of the economy, and it should eventually bring in changes in the macroeconomic system, or it should be able to even institutional changes, and it should be eventually able to even change the agenda of the government. So basically, coming back to the rural institutions, we know that these innovations, which I have told you right now, has to be brought into rural institutions. You should know how to innovate this rural institution, or how to bring in this process of innovation in rural institution. So basically, when you have an overall observation of what is happening with various rural institutions across the world, currently you can see 4 different types of services which can be provided by emerging rural institutions in the country, not only in the country, across the world. The first and foremost thing, it could be even seen as a typology of rural institutions. The major functions of rural institutions. Say, for example, rural institutions, again, I remind you, when I say rural institution, it is a gathering of the rural people, or the rural poor, or the small and marginal farmers for a particular purpose, either formally or informally. So we will say it as an institution when they come up formally. So it can be a small group of producers, it can be a small democratic group, say for example a Grama Sabha, or it can be say for example a farmer interest group, or it can be a farmer producer organization. It can be anything for that matter. But right from the beginning I told you, we have witnessed several such rural institutions, cooperative institutions, producers institutions, producers organization groups. All those things are considered to be, or can be considered to be, rural institutions in the context of agriculture and rural development. So what are the different institutions and what are the different services rendered by them? I'm not talking about sociological institution. I made it clear right from the beginning. Family in sociology is called as an institution, but that is different. That is a sociological terminology. Here we are dealing with rural institutions which have got a formal or informal structure which is formed with a particular objective of accomplishing a particular activity or doing a particular activity which would benefit the members of that group. So in such conditions, so you consider such groups as institutions, and you can see that there are several objectives, or there are several arrays of activities which are performed by these groups or these institutions. The first one is access to and management of natural resources, very important aspect as far as rural institutions are concerned. You might have heard about joint forest management, a new concept which has been, not a new concept, maybe almost about quarter of a century we have been hearing about joint forest management. So initially when it was started, it did not work properly, but later on nowadays, it has now shown its presence not only in managing the fringe areas of the forest, they have been quite helpful in conserving natural resources, conserving many organic forest regions. They are playing a big role in resource utilization, afforestation, and so many things. Even in responsible tourism, those groups are becoming more functional now. So that is one example. So you can see water user groups. So there are several areas in India as well as in other parts of the world where people come together to find out how water could be used judiciously among themselves. So farmers come together. So they use a water user group and they try to lay down principles and practices and their own laws by which that precious resource is distributed among themselves. How do they do that? How do they do it judiciously so that everybody gets access to water? So there are such institutions coming in. So you might have heard about the Chipko Andolan kind of a thing, even though that was a movement. Basically, that movement was some kind of an institution wherein people came together to conserve forest. So it was basically, it turned out to be a, I would say, very effective regulatory mechanism as well. People could not go, I mean, they could not infiltrate into forest areas and cut trees because that was reprimanded by the local people themselves. So management of natural resources in terms of, say, by protection, by imposing regulations, or by surveillance, or by proactively involving in afforestation kind of things, all such things are possible. Say, for example, in Kerala, we have got certain organizations which are pledged or which are committed to conservation of rivers. So people who are living on the bank of rivers, they come together and they decide that we should not allow people to, say, mine sand, or maybe they try to plant mangroves, or they try to drive away people who come and throw waste into water. So any number of such things can happen. So there are a few people who are trying to manage waste for that matter. So these groups may come together, they try to involve in these kinds of very vital activities. They, through their group action, try to enhance their access to and management of natural resources. And another important kind service, a category of service, which is being offered through these institutions are, say, accessing input and output markets. That also is very important. Say, for example, you want to have seeds, a small seed growers association, maybe a seed village kind of a thing, which can be set up. We have seen several such instances. I have recently, yesterday, I have read about an initiative by the forest department in some of the tribal belts where they did not have, earlier they had a rich biodiversity of ragi, which got receded year by year, and at some point of time they had only one ragi variety which was cultivated by the tribals. They had almost about 33 to 35 ragi varieties, indigenous varieties. So there is a small action group. They went around and tried to collect all ragi varieties from the neighborhood and also from other tribal settlements. And at the end of the third year or so, they have been able to come up with almost about 33 ragi varieties for live cultivation among the tribals. It's not a small thing. So it has got huge impact on the livelihood security of people. So this input and output market also for that matter. Say, for example, small groups of, say, marketing, particularly in tribal areas, in fishermen areas, and also among small and marginal farmers, you can find several groups who are involved in output markets as well. So people can come together informally and then involve in this activity so that a synergy would be brought in. And another important thing is improving access to information and knowledge. That also is important, says knowledge groups, particularly Say nowadays we have got WhatsApp and other social media groups. But not only that, even otherwise also practitioners can come together. Say for example, we have a program called the Lead Farmer Program here, wherein a satellite farmers would come together with a prominent farmer, and there would be a small group who would be discussing about production practices and ever so many other things related to agriculture. People come together and do this. So there can be informal groups and which can evolve into formal institutions, improving access to information and knowledge. And also there can be participation of these small producers in policy making. That also is very important. Say for example, there are several instances where GI tagged products are produced by indigenous groups. So why don't you think of a small group of people who are producing such exotic, I would say, very exquisite products in a particular area. So they can come together, a small production group. So they were all dissipated group. They were not organized earlier. Now they are organized and they can make the government hear their concerns. They can very well project themselves. They can say that we have got such and such issues. They can even think of representing their cases in the higher tiers of the government, so that government comes to know about the issues of such people. So if their solitary participation or solitary involvement of someone or one or two people, it would not be effective. We have several instances here. Say for example, we have a particularly very important geographical area, the coal lands in Trichur. Or say for example, you have a patch of land which is growing a particular variety in a very particular situation, say Pokali, saline situation, saline water agriculture. So it has got medicinal quality for the produce. So people come together, people try to conserve that natural resource, they make that produce, and they have now become a formidable group. They are now able to sell their produce at a higher price, and they are also able to make the people's representatives hear their concerns so that they can intervene with policy measures. So such things are also possible. So small producers' participation can be ensured in policy making only when such rural institutions become stronger. So again, I had told you about these things. A small picture was given. Again, say for example, the one which I had told you, regulate access to and help manage natural resources for small farmers. I have cited a few examples. There can be mediation committees for conflict resolution over land or securing land use rights. See, there are issues in some parts of India where land use rights are at stake. Say people don't have possession of land, title deeds. So how do they cultivate? They will have to hire land or lease land on certain conditions. So in such cases, there should be some regulatory measure by which the interest of both the parties are safeguarded. So in such cases, you have to have mediation committees by the people themselves. Say now we have the farm laws passed by the parliament. There is a huge cry over that. I mean, there are several opinions aired about the feasibility of such farm laws passed by the government. But there is one issue which has been raised by many people. So how do you negotiate with the contracting agency in contract farming? So how do you make sure that your rights are safeguarded? So in such cases, unless these institutions are not strong enough to argue for their case, to fight for their case, to champion their cause, it is going to be very difficult for them in the emerging scenario. So think of a situation where the small farmers are approached by a contractor for contract farming, and the agreements are breached. So in such cases, if they are not organized, it is going to be very difficult. That is one reason why rural institutions have to be strengthened in any form, for that matter. It can be any innovative form. It need not be FPOs alone. It can be anything else. I would not say that you have got a particular model and that has to be emulated by everybody. No, it can be any model which can suit a given context. It need not be one single kind of model. It can be any model. It can be a combination of different models even. That also is possible. And that is why these innovations in rural institutions are very important. It need not be a copycat. So everybody has to have a cooperative. Everybody should have a farmer producer organization or a farmer interest group. No, it need not be. It can be new forms. It can be new organizational structures which you can suggest and which you can propose and which you can even help grow. So these are the different types of activities, interventions by rural institutions, mediation committees, women groups for reclaiming land. That also is very important. Several places we have seen. I told you about the Chipko movement and all that. Forest community-based enterprises for generating income activities. I told you about the Joint Forest Management Group. So these arrangements would provide incentives for small producers to manage natural resources in a sustainable way while creating benefits for the rural community. So coming to the second one, increase their access to markets and productive assets. See, one important thing is that it would reduce the transaction cost. Certainly it would reduce the transaction cost because the economy of scale issue will be addressed at least partially when people come together. So one single farmer taking his produce to the market and then undergoing all the trial and tribulation, maybe all the difficulties, I don't know whether he would be able to survive long, particularly in this situation. It is going to be very difficult. So they have to come together and think of aggregating their produce, think of compiling their produce, and think of instituting mechanisms by which from a single place, all these things could be harnessed and taken to the market so that the issue of transaction cost would be reduced. So this is going to be very important. Again, I would say, I would draw your attention to the newly formulated farm bills which have been passed with the parliament. So this is one issue which has been raised by the protesting farmers. See, the mandi system now, already have that system of aggregating the produce, and they can be taken to the market and they will be given the floor price. But think of a situation where such a system is demolished, does not exist any longer. What would happen? The responsibility of aggregation of produce at a point of production would be that of the farmers. So no government support would be extended, no public sector support would be extended. And if the private sector, the actor, does not want to aggregate it from a place due to the cost-related issues, if you hesitate to do that, the poor farmer will have to make arrangements for that. So there are all such concerns, in all such scenarios, I think coming together is very important. And also input demand and supplying them can be grouped. Again, that's an important thing. We had tried out in Kerala almost about 2 decades back, group farming process, particularly because of the fact that Kerala always had very small and marginal farmers. So how do you optimize the use of resources? How do you make it more economic? So in such cases, you have to go for inputs which can be grouped, or the input supply can be grouped. It can be done as a group. It can be done simultaneously so that the cost incurred would be less. And you can also ensure adequate supply of materials to all the people simultaneously, which would have some agronomic effects also, that would certainly enhance the growth of crop, that would certainly enhance production. So all such things would be possible only if these institutions become stronger. And again, say for example, I have already told you, improving access to information and knowledge. This information and knowledge is a very important thing as far as the modern times are concerned, because knowledge is a major input as far as production is concerned, not only for big farmers, but for the smaller farmers also. It is more important in small farming because the responsibility of the farmer, who is a small farmer, is small because he has to produce as much as possible from unit land area. So since he has to maximize his production as much as possible, so technology is very important. Technology is very important, and technological options have to be weighed so precisely that it should not bring about any problem for the farmers. It should be a very precise recommendation. Unless it is a precise recommendation, there would be huge losses. He will not be able to bear it. So in such cases, you have to take extra care that the small and marginal farmers get precise recommendations and their information needs are addressed very precisely, exactly when it is required. I think your extension system has to be much more broad-based and widened. It has to be more efficient in order to keep the small and marginal farmers in good shape and health. Because unless they have access to this kind of most updated information, on appropriate technologies, they would not be able to survive longer. So this is a very important aspect of extension. So this improving access to information and knowledge cannot be done through single farmers. It cannot be done through independent or individual farmers. It can be done only through aggregates of farmers, which is nothing but this rural institution, which can happen only through these rural institutions. So what happens is, this would certainly help them build their capacity to analyze their production systems, identify their problems, and test possible solutions, which is very important. They should be able to identify the issues that they face. Even without the help of an external source of information, they should be able to analyze their farming systems and suggest changes on their own as much as possible. That can happen only when they have access to the latest information on various technological options. And the last one is enabling small producers to engage in policy making. See, as I told you, this would help small producers voice their concerns and interest in policy making process. So this would certainly provide them with multi-stakeholder platforms and consultative forums. And these forums and platforms would provide them with the opportunity to voice their concerns. And that would also help them discuss and design public policies. So this has happened. So what should be a policy initiative to be meted out to, or the policy approach to be adopted by the government with regard to a particular group of people at a particular area, that can be made visible only when those people come together. If they do not come together, it is going to be difficult for them to express their concerns. So this is very important. That is the most important political component of rural institutions. So if they really want to enhance their bargaining power, if they really want to make people hear this, then they should come together. So I think the responsibility of the extension agencies, field level extension personnel, as well as researchers in extension, should be to explore ways by which these rural institutions can be strengthened, the various ways by which rural institutions functions across the institutions function across this country, and how can they be innovated, how can innovation process be integrated into the rural institutions. How do you mainstream these concerns with regard to rural institutions is a major concern of the extension fraternity. So basically, having seen all this, there is a framework for rural institutions. There has to be a framework for approaching anything related to rural institution, particularly the field work, particularly research. We should be able to approach rural institutions from this framework. The first one is the territorial and place-based approaches. So you know that these rural institutions cannot have a universal model. I told you, you cannot have a universal model which can be emulated across the globe. No, it is not possible, because agriculture is highly contextual. It is contextual not only in terms of biodiversity or climate, it is also contextual in terms of the socio-economic conditions and political conditions. I do not know how many of you have closely looked into the background of an extension policy by a government. So you can see the evolution of extension policies from one point of time to other point of time. If you do not have the political background, the socio-economic changes that have taken place due to various policy changes, you would not be able to find out the exact course of evolution of the extension policy. Extension policy always is something related to the mega, I would say, economic policy, as well as the ideological and political stances of the government from time to time. So this is a very important thing. Since it is absolutely contextual, agriculture is absolutely contextual in all terms, in all, with respect to everything. So you should have territorial and place-based approaches. One particular rural institution which would be working so good in a place would not be working properly in another place. One cooperative which has been very successful at some place would not be very successful in other place. In such other places, you have to improvise the organization structure. You have to go for changes. Unless you have that kind of a change, the possibility and flexibility to bring in that kind of change, it is going to be very difficult. So always bear in mind that whenever you talk about rural institution, you cannot just dictate terms. You cannot prescribe one single model as a universal model, as a very successful model. because any model can falter and change as a result of various contextual issues, which I told you. So it is always better to have a territorial and place-based approach, which is highly contextual. So the spatial dimension of rural poverty and hunger is also very important. In some areas, you can see more hunger. I told you about the example of the very poor, I would say destitutes, basket weavers of Dhaka. Just like that, you can see, say, you go to any undeveloped part of India, you can see people reeling under abject poverty, wherein your composition of rural institution would not work at all. You cannot think of a farmer producer organization. I have a recent experience of offering help to formulate to farmer producing organization in some part of a major district in Kerala. So farmer producer organizations are supposed to be very successful organizations which are being advocated by us now. But when we went there, we could see that the farmers did not like that at all due to various reasons. They had their own reasons to say no to that. Again, we tried to entice them, to encourage them to form a group. Even that was not very easy because they had their own traditional forms of organization by which they do that. So then why do you change it? So what are the added advantages? You will have to convince them. So such organizations cannot be prescribed. Rather, I think a development agency should have the flexibility to closely study the rural institutions, their structure and functions, and then come up with new insights as to how to improvise them. It would be difficult for you to replace an entire system all of a sudden, particularly in rural areas. It can be done only gradually, and it is required only if it is required. If it is not required, why should you unnecessarily change an environment, unnecessarily create shocks? It is not required at all. So this is very important. And the second perspective or the framework is development of conducive policies and institutional frameworks for inclusive rural services and finance systems. This is very important. It's not only a question of natural resource access or resource to see, their capability with regard to their transaction should also increase. They should know how to market their produce. They should know how to organize their production process in such a way that they get maximum yield out of their intervention. They should also know various options of marketing. They should also know how to integrate modern technology into their production systems. They should also know how timely they can operate various things. Those things are very important, for which they should have access to credit. They should have access to marketing options. They should have access to marketing channels. They should have access to resources and raw materials. They should have some finance system by which their revenue model can be robust. So all such modern managerial things are also required to be placed properly if you really want to make a rural institution functional. That is very important. And the last one, but I would say the way as well as the objective together is social mobilization and empowerment. Social mobilization and empowerment would not happen unless you ensure active participation of rural women and men in development process. But how do you do this is a big question. How can you do this is a big question. What are the different methods by which you can make people participate in the development process? Is it that you can go everywhere into a village and then ask people to come together? You can have a PRA and then formulate a program and then make them participate every now and then. Is it possible? So what exactly are you talking about participation? When you discuss about participation, what really comes to your mind? How can you make people participate? How can you empower people? So you have to explore various ways by which you can empower people. So that is also going to be a big challenge for the extension scientist, I would say, because unless you know how to forge ways by which you can ensure participation of people in the process of development, the system of inefficiency which is existing in this country as of now would never change. It is a question of political empowerment. It's a question of social empowerment. It's a question of economic empowerment. And how do you make people participate in the entire process of development in a rural area is very important. So in Kerala, we have over a period of time developed a system of making people participate directly in the process of project formulation through a People's Plan program, decentralized planning program, as a fallout of the democratic decentralization legislation passed by the government of India way back in 1994. So we came up with certain new rural institutions which can participate in the process of planning. We came up with a working group, for example, who would find out various developmental probabilities in a ward, in a village. That working group is a formal organization consisting of the officers of the department and people's representatives and farmers. They sit together and try to find out what are the options which are available to us, what are the developmental priorities. So there is a series of processes. I don't think I would get time to explain all those things. So that is a new institutional process which was put in place to see that people participate, to make people participate in the process. So such innovations are quite possible. Several such innovations have taken place in different parts of the world. Even in India, you can find out. Maybe at the behest of NGOs, at the behest of even, I would say, public sector institutions. We have been able to come up with certain models and practices. It's very important that we should keenly explore those practices. So I think it is almost time for me to conclude, but still I think I would just pass through a few concepts which I wanted to present before you. So regarding the framework of rural institutions and as to how to do this, they have given you a broader guideline as to how to approach this problem. The territorial and place-based approaches are very important as far as rural institutions are concerned. You should also think of possibilities of including or instituting inclusive rural services and finance systems, and also social mobilization and empowerment which are required to strengthen the rural poor is very important. So there can be several pathways by which you would be able to do this. One important thing as far as extension is concerned, again, I am again focusing on extension, is the issue of public-private partnership. So private partnership does not mean that it's a corporate kind of a private partnership, but ways by which you would be able to bring in the private actors into the system so that the rural institutions which are formed for a particular purpose get benefited out of certain transactions which can strengthen some of their capabilities. Say, for example, marketing. Say, take the example of a GI tagged product, which cannot be marketed by the farmer groups due to inherent incapabilities. So such roles can be taken up by a private firm. It need not be a huge multinational. It can be a small-scale private firm who can be robbed in to address a vital issue of marketing by a producer's forum. So that's a possibility. But care has to be exercised in approaching such people. You should have the capability to dictate terms. You should know how to negotiate with such actors. So in extension practice, this is going to be a major problem. Whether you have the capability to negotiate with such people, to define the terms and conditions by which two organizations can work together, whether you would be able to dictate the terms of references by which you can work together. So these are the capabilities which have to be gathered or acquired by the farmers groups themselves over a period of time. They should be able to clearly articulate what they really want to have. So negotiation skills is very important as far as rural institutions are concerned, particularly in the context of partnership development between different stakeholders. So for example, the NGOs maybe, or the private sector, or whatever comes on the way. So I think these partnerships can be in value chains, it can be in technology transfer. That also is a big partnership coming. Say, for example, nowadays you come to know about several entrepreneurs coming up with extension services as their hallmark. People who are involved in extension services alone. They have a small group of subscribers, say for example 200 or 300 or maybe 500 or 1000 or 3000 or 5000 subscribers, and they give periodic advisories, and these periodic advisories are also supplemented by supply of inputs and other services, sometimes even procurement. So one single agency would be able to cater to several requirements of the farmer groups. Farmer groups get adequate information from time to time, and they also get supported through various other auxiliary services provided by the app owner or the app manager. So new forms are evolving. So there is a big scope, I would say, of linking the existing rural institutions with this kind of people who are service providers. And also there can be partnerships for building and upgrading infrastructure, need not be market alone. See, the government has now come up with, particularly post-COVID scenario, most of the investments declared by the government of India is for rural infrastructure. There is a special fund for that. And we came to know about the inadequacies of storage structures and procurement centers when there was severe disruptions in the supply chain in the first during the lockdown and also the post-lockdown period. Even now, after a long spell of lockdown recently, there has been issues. There are several problems in the supply chains which can be addressed only through infrastructure. And this infrastructure is a very important thing as far as rural institutions are concerned. It's not only a gathering of people, you should have the wherewithal also, the infrastructure also to deal with most of those issues. So likewise, maybe the third one can be maybe development of your business models, which is very important. I told you about farmer groups coming up, institutions coming up, and they should know how to deal with those problems. How do you analyze the market, and then how do you get into the market? How do you find out various possibilities? How can you assess the scope of development? All those things are important. So in such cases, you should know how to develop business, about which an organization, say for example, a rural group or a rural group will not be having any knowledge, any even primary knowledge. Even the extension personnel would not even be able to maybe support them. So in such cases, you have to rope in people who have expertise in that kind of activities as well. So there are several ways by which you can do that. So there are several benefits of partnering. I told you there is a new environment would be created, and as a result of that, you would be going for joint learning and social learning. It would contribute to economic growth. They will be having relevance through contact with the real problems. So you get to know what exactly are the problems, then increase the employment opportunities. And also, now we are talking about knowledge economy. So this knowledge economy is nothing but an economy based on information and knowledge. So this transfer of knowledge and information at the right time, and a society taking its decision based on objective, scientific, and managerial knowledge would certainly prosper. So making a society into a knowledge economy means there should be even distribution of knowledge among the members of the group and society. So this is a humongous task. All the research organizations, all the extension organizations should rise up to that standard and level to see that a knowledge economy emerges. Knowledge economy can emerge only if there is, I would say, hassle-free flow of knowledge among the stakeholders. So that is very important. So again, there are several benefits of partnering. So we have a few rural institutions which we speak nowadays, the FPOs. I think I need not talk much about the FPOs. And also we have things like cooperatives, which is going to be a very important player. We have seen huge cooperatives working. Now I think it is time for you to go back to cooperatives again, particularly in the emerging scenario. So FPOs plus cooperatives, I think would certainly be able to address many of the issues if cooperatives are given if cooperatives are given uh, the opportunity to work, if they are not constrained by regulations by the center, if they are given free hand and if they are regulated properly, certainly there will be improvement. And also, I think those things are not required. Those things are not required. And let's talk about this cooperative extension model in Japan, where how cooperatives work hand in hand with the extension agencies and rural institutions. So I think with this, I think I would stop for the time being. So there are so many other activities coming up as a part of empowerment uh, of these farmer groups. But most important thing, what I would suggest right now is how do you coordinate rural institutions for synergy? So I had been talking about only this. I think I would wrap up right now. Discrete actions would not be effective. Instead, you have to go for integration. Integration in the sense, spatial integration, I told you earlier, and also organizational integration for more resources, more focused intervention, and also for more sustainability. So unless you bring all your resources together, unless you bring convergence, wherein rural institutions also have a major role to play, then unless you have this, the process of development would not be very effective. So this is something which I think is left to the extension researchers. They have to make serious studies on these issues, on rural institutions, how to bring in such changes, and how can you improvise and improve existing rural institutions. Very important. So with this, I think I would stop for the time being. We can have a brief discussion as well. It is heavy rains here. I cannot even hear what I say because there's huge rain and winds. I don't know whether I would even lose my connectivity. Anyway, I will try to listen to you. I thank the organizers for inviting me to this lecture. I thank everyone. I know that it was a very lengthy and monotonous monologue most of the time because I am not able to see any one of you. I do not know how many of you are on, how many of you are sleeping, how many of you have been going away uh, from the conference. So I do not know anything about what is happening in front of me. So it was a blind talk, talking to the camera. I know that these online systems are not very effective, particularly because we don't have one-to-one contact. But still, we are now destined to live with these systems due to the pandemic. That hope I would be, or we would be able to come back to normalcy soon. So with all this, I once again express my gratitude. I wish you all the success in your career. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Now, if there are any questions or interactions you would want to do, please do. We have some time, few minutes left in our time. We can do those. Thank you. Any participant with any question, please ask.
Yeah, I request the participants if there are any queries to our resource person, please. The topic is open for discussion. Majid ji, are there any questions in the chat box? Majid ji?
If I don't see any questions in the chat, if there are any questions on audio which people want to ask directly, that can happen. If not, then we can consider the session to be concluded and you can present the formal vote of thanks.
Yeah, I think if there are no questions in the chat box,
There are no questions in the chat box. Mostly people are thanking sir for the beautiful presentation sir has presented us with. That is what is happening in the chat.
yeah. Sir, okay, then I take this opportunity to formally thank our today's resource person, Dr. GGP Alex, sir, Director of Extension, KAU, Kerala Agriculture University. In fact, even I was also listening to the whole presentation, and sir has covered lot of things in this, because all of us know actually the importance of rural institutions and how should we go ahead interlinking with the institutions, rural institutions and different organizations. In fact, he has also touched upon different aspects of public-private partnership, even a little bit about FPO and some other experiences that he has come across. In fact, it was a very nice presentation, sir, from his side. I'm sure, although we have participants from other subjects, but most of us actually go in touch with actually the rural institutions, and I'm sure most of us are benefited with this. And I really thank you for giving me time as well as sharing your experiences on behalf of our organization team as well as our participants. Thank you very much once again, sir. So for all the participants, let us meet again at 2:30 for the next session. Sir, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Let's join back at 2:30. Thank you.